Swifters, it's Prof G. Are you ready to be ladies and lords of the list? Well, in this lesson, we're going to work with SwiftUI lists. We'll learn various list formats, we'll work with navigation titles, we'll learn about list sections, we'll add headers to sections, we'll work with for each and list, we'll learn to pass static, constant values between views, and we'll correct a problem with a preview provider so that it'll display a separate view in a file, and we'll provide a bit more info on the letter markers related to Git and GitHub and Xcode. Now, we're building off our prior lesson, so if you haven't completed that earlier lesson on NavigationStacks and Links, you'll want to head back and do that first. But for everyone else, let's be like Santa, making a list and checking it twice. Swift on! And now let's head back to our to-do list view and learn a little bit about lists in SwiftUI. Now, for all you Python programmers out there, lists in SwiftUI are nothing like lists in Python. A list, capital L, in SwiftUI is all about the views. And as we'll see, it presents views as rows of data in a single column. So I'm going to highlight my VStack and I'm going to delete it. And then I'm going to enter a list with a capital L followed by open and close curlies. So we're going to use the list to present a bunch of views in a single column. Another similar technique in SwiftUI uses something called form, but I prefer a list, so we'll show that here. And the list has some additional formatting features that we'll also demonstrate. So inside the list's curlies, I'm going to enter 4 text views for the 4 seasons. Text winter, text summer, text spring, and text fall. And we see the iOS default for list is for these individual rows to be indented on each side, each view in a separate row, with a line separator in between and a gray background. So how do you work with navigation links in here? Well, it's the same way. Above the winter text view, I'm going to enter navigation link, select the option with destination and label, press return, return again to get the trailing closure format, and I'll cut out my first text view, the winter text view, and paste it in between the navigation link's second set of curlies, that's the label curlies, and in the curlies above this is where I want to go. So I specify my destination in here, where I go, and I'm going to click on winter, and that's just going to be the detail view, again, upper camel case with open and close parens. This creates a new view using our detail view struct blueprint that's inside of the detail view file. And if you look in preview, now you can see that there's a disclosure chevron, a thing that looks like a greater than symbol, just to the right of winter, indicating that if we click this row, we'll go somewhere. So click that row, and we end up in the detail view. Nice! Yet another look we can achieve in SwiftUI. And this is a familiar UI look, not dissimilar to what you would find, say, in the Settings app on your iPhone. So when you navigate like this with a chevron in a row, you usually use the back button to navigate back. So I'm going to return to my detail view file and I'm going to remove the modifier navigation back button hidden. Now when I return to the to-do list view to run the app from the start of the app, I see the back button is now on that second view. Nice. So feel free to add more navigation links to our to-do list view for the other 3 seasons if you'd like. I'm going to skip that now so we can concentrate on other ways to format the list. So above winter, I'm going to enter section with a capital S followed by open and close curlies, and this is going to allow me to group my rows into separate sections. So I'm going to cut out my whole navigation link code down here, paste this between the section curlies, and I'm also going to cut out the summer text view and paste that between the section curlies as well. And look at what we got on the right. The first 2 views are in a separate section with a gray space in between. So now I'm going to do the same with the spring and fall text views just below this section. So I'll create another section with open and close curlies, cut out the 2 remaining text views, paste them between those curlies of that section. This looks pretty much the same, but those second 2 views are in their own section. And in other apps on the iPhone, you might have seen headers listed above group sections like this. And of course we can add those. So just below the closing curly of the first section, I'm going to start to type the word header. Code completion says, I know what this is. It's actually going to add another parameter with a closure for additional code that we can enter for our section. So press return. Xcode writes this with header and a colon, puts in open and close curlies, leaves us between those curlies so we can write our header. So since winter and summer are vacation breaks for college students, I'm going to write in text passing in the string breaks. And for the section below this, I'm going to add a header down here too, and in between those curlies, I'm going to pass in the text view that says semesters. I can see 2 sections now have headers, and with the default list format, the headers are shown in all caps. Cool! Navigation still works. Now, in many apps, you'll also see a navigation title at the top of our list. So let's add that now. We can add a navigation title modifier. Somewhere inside the navigation stack is where we put this. We can't do it after the closing curlies of the navigation stack. So even though after the navigation stack's closing curly might seem like the right place to add something that modifies the navigation stack, but you've got to put the title modifier inside the nav stack's curlies. Now, to make sure that I see the closing curly for the navigation stack, I'm going to double click on the navigation stack's open curly. It highlights through the nav stack's closing curly, so I know just above this is where I want to enter my navigation title modifier. That's right after the closing curly for the list modifier. So here I'm going to enter .navigation title. Code completion says this configures the view title for purposes of navigation. That's what we want. Press return. It says it takes in text, but we can actually just put a string in here. So I'm going to put in the string school year, and we now have a nice navigation title up top. Cool. Navigation still works. Note that the back button takes the navigation title. It now says school year. But note that the header doesn't follow us to the detail view. It only shows up in the to-do list view, and that's what it should be doing. Now, a lot of the apps you'll see have a large title like the one that we're looking at. This is the default option for displaying a navigation title, but you might also have seen some apps that have a smaller title, so let's see how we can switch to the smaller title. So below our navigation title modifier, I'm going to enter a new modifier, .navigation title bar display mode. Code completion says this configures the title display mode for the view. Press return. And what are the options that I can enter here? Well, dot notation can help us out. I see inline, large, automatic. Large is the default. That's also what we'll see in here if we select automatic. So let's try inline. Ooh, and we see the smaller title now centered in the navigation bar. Cool. Just more formatting options that you now know for working with navigation title. So I'm going to head back to .automatic, although frankly, if you delete this modifier, it'll still be the same because that's the default. And now let's look at changing the style of the list itself, because you don't always want these indented rows in the gray background. So below my title modifiers at the end of my list, and unlike the navigation title, it is okay to put list modifiers at the end of the list. I'll click to code fold the list so you can see that a bit better. I'm going to add .list style. Code completion says this sets the style for the lists within the view. Dot notation reveals the styles inside. There are quite a few in here. Some work specifically with the iPad. Others show up differently for code if you run it on a Mac, for example. But since we're concentrating on iOS, we'll just focus on those ones that are relevant options here. So again, automatic gives us what we're taking a look at right now. This is also the same as dot inset group. So this is indented or inset rows with a gray background. If we change this to just dot grouped, we see the inset or indenting goes away, but we still see the gray background at the top and bottom. Navigating still works. If you select inset or plain, they both look the same. No more gray background. There's still a slight bit of padding around the list, but navigation works fine. I like this option for our to-do list, so I'm going to keep this dot plain setting. So let's work with some more options inside of the list. So I'm going to highlight everything that I put in between the list curlies, these two sections here. I'm going to backspace them to delete them. My cursor's outdented, but if I Control I, it will indent it below the list where it should be. And now let's work with a for each so we can enter lots of rows. So in between these empty list curlies, I'm going to enter for each and select one of the options that has data, ID, and content. And for the data here, I'm going to enter a half open range. We saw this in an earlier lesson as well. So I'll enter 0 ... less than symbol 100. So this will create 100 values from 0 to 99. Then I'll tab to ID. And in a later lesson, we're going to learn how we can automatically create an ID for our own data structure. So we won't need this, but we do need it here. And we've done this before. We just enter \dot self lowercase. Then I'll tab to the content area and press return. And I can call the element anything I'd like, but I think I'll call mine number here, since it'll be a number from 0 to 99. Tab over to code, and in the code area below, I'm going to enter a text view, which should be created 99 times. So inside of the text view, I'm going to pass in a string saying that this is between quotes item space string interp, and I'll pass number inside the string interp. And look at that. I've got 100 rows now in my list. So let's add navigation links to each of these. Above the text view I just entered, I'm going to enter navigation link, select the option with the destination and label, press return and return again to get the trailing closure format, and then I'll cut out the text view that I created, and in this first closure, I'm going to enter the destination, which remember is detail view, open and close parens, and then between the curlies for the label, paste in the text view that I cut out. And will you look at this in the preview? I get 100 rows. Now each has a disclosure chevron to the right. That's 100 navigation links. So now you can click any of these, head back to our detail view. So now let's head to the detail view file and let's set this up so that we can actually receive a value passed in from the to-do list view. So up top here in the detail view file inside the struct, I'm going to create a new variable. I'll do this right above the environment variable. I'll say var, and I'll call this passed value lower camel case :string. So I've declared this, but I have not initialized this. Why don't I initialize it? Because the value that's going to go in here is going to come from the to-do list view when I click on the navigation link. And so that we can show any value that we've passed in here, I'm also going to head down to the text view down here that says you are Swifty Legend. And just before the closing double quote, I'm going to add a \n. Remember, that's the escape character we learned about way back in a previous lesson. That's going to add a line feed, and I'll follow this with, and you passed over the value string interp, and inside the string interp, I'm going to put in passed value, that variable that we just created above. Now let's head back to our to-do list view file, and we're now going to get an error in the detail view call. If we click on the red error circle, we see missing argument for parameter passed value in call. Oh yeah, because we just had a declared but not initialized value called passed value in our detail view. We need to pass a value into that uninitialized variable. Now we see we've got a fix in here. Why don't we click that fix? And Xcode changes the call to the detail view by adding the passed value, which requires a string. And just to show you another way to get Xcode to set up the passed value argument, we can delete the parens and a single character into the detail view, the W at the end, then retype that last character, and now we see Code Completion presents the option to have a passed value argument. Select that, and we get the same thing. So what I'm going to put in here is, in between double quotes, item space string interp, and in between the string interp, I'm going to pass in number, that variable up here, and I'm still getting errors in here. My preview isn't running on the canvas, so I'm going to click on this little circle in the upper right-hand corner and pull down. If I select this, Xcode is going to bring me right to the detail view where the error is. And I see the problem. It's the pesky preview provider in my detail view file. See how this is calling detail view with just the open and close parens? Well, now the detail view requires a value passed in for the variable name passed value. I need to pass something into this detail view created here in the preview provider as well. Click the red error circle. That's what we see, missing argument for the parameter passed value. But if I click the fix button, Xcode fixes this by adding the parameter value for me. Thank you, Xcode. And for the passed value variable, I can really enter any string in here. I'm just going to enter the string item1. The error goes away. I see item 1 in the preview, but if I want to see the whole app running, I can head back to the to-do list view file, and I can click on any of the rows, and now I see the row that I'm passing into the item view value. In the detail view, it shows up in the text view text. Cool. And I'm sorry, I've got a quirk here because I'm using a beta version of Xcode. The back button should be changing to the name of the title view from the navigation stack, so it should be school year because that's our navigation stack title. Here it's item for some buggy reason. Oh, and it looks like item is the navigation title, but we can see that that's not the case in my code, so this definitely is a bug. But if I quit Xcode and re-enter my project, I can see it's now school year as expected. So what happens is if there is a navigation title, your back button takes on the name of that navigation title. And if I'd rather start my item counting at 1 instead of 0, I can either change my range or I can just add +1 to my number variable in the text view, and when I pass this into the detail view, so great. We've had a chance to explore lists, and we took a look at how to pass basic unchanging data, so constant data, from one view to another. Now passing changeable data is what we're going to want to do in our to-do list. So we have to do a little bit more with that. We'll learn how to do that in a future lesson. But for now, let's just create a few strings to mimic some items we might have in a to-do list. So first, down in the navigation title modifier, I'm going to change the string school year to to-do list. So first, let's create an array of strings to mimic a bunch of to-do list items. So let's create this in our to-do list view file. Up top, inside the struct, I'm going to say var to-dos, lower camel case, equals, and this is an array, so we need square brackets, and I'll enter a bunch of strings separated by commas to mimic to-dos. So how about learn Swift, build apps, change the world, bring the awesome, and take a vacation. And if I highlight the last elements of the array and type Control-I, Xcode will fix the indentations nicely. So now I'm going to cut out the code between the curlies in the list, and I'm going to enter a new for each statement in here to iterate through this new to-dos array that I just entered. Now, any option with data, ID, and content should be fine. So for data, I'm just going to enter to-dos. That's the array that we just created. I'll tab over. The ID is still going to be \self. Tab over again, press return in content to get the trailing closure. I'll just call this to-do singular, then tab to enter what I want to display in the list. So that's a text view passing in to-do. And I don't have any navigation chevrons on the right because I haven't yet added navigation links, but we know how to fix that. So just above the text view, I'm going to enter navigation link. I'll select the option with the destination and label, press return again to get the trailing closures. And for the destination, this is going to be detail view, press return. Remember, this wants us to pass in a value, so I'm going to pass in just to do. And for the label, I'll just cut out the text view down below and paste it in between the label curlies. And now I see I have disclosure chevrons for my navigation links for each row in my to-do list items. Let's click on the first option, Learn Swift. I navigate to the detail view, and the text says I've passed over Learn Swift. Nice! I'll navigate back. So Swifter, this looks great. In this lesson, we learned about lists, how to configure them, how to work with navigation titles, how to pass unchanged data, constant data, from one view to another. But we're eventually going to work with dynamic data, so we can add new to-do list items, delete items, update existing items. But first, in the next lesson, we're going to set up our detail view so it looks more like what we want in our final to-do list app. Now, one more thing worth mentioning before we finish up. If we look at the letter markers to the right of our files in the Project Navigator, here's a list of what those letters mean. Now, they're not well documented inside the Xcode documentation. Then I'm going to create a new GitHub repository and push this to GitHub. Now, this is the first commit, so if I select Integrate and Commit, I won't have any of my changes committed. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to click on Repository and then expand Main and right-click on Remote, and I'll create a new to-do list remote. I already have a repo named to-do list from the old UIKit days, so I'm going to name this one to-do list Swift Data. Then I'll click on Create, but you'll notice the first time I click Commit and Push, if I take a look back in my Project Navigator, none of the letters have left. So I haven't updated any of my changes. That's because my first commit in a project is always the base project with nothing in it. But if I head back to Integration and I select Commit a second time, then I enter a comment, how about now with updates? Then I'll pull down the commit button and select commit and push, and I'll click stage all changes and commit and push. And when I'm done, if I open the Project Navigator, none of the files have letters next to them. And if I click and open any of my Swift files, I don't see any change indicators in here, which means that all changes have been committed. They've been backed up to my new repo. Again, this is something you do want to do Swifter, not only because this will back up your files, but technical recruiters absolutely look at your GitHub profile, and they want to see lots of projects in your progression as you learn over time. So keep at this goodness, Swifter. There's more big learning to come, and hopefully a big paying job is headed your way at the end of the Swifty journey as well. Keep hacking.